In this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive on the difference between renting versus buying your own home, which is arguably one of the biggest life decisions that you can possibly make. But it seems half of people think that buying is the biggest financial trap of our generation, while the other half believe that by renting, you may as well be throwing your money down the drain each month. So in this video, with a little bit of help from my architectural expertise, I'm going to try and figure out who's right by doing a deep dive into, firstly, the myths, preconceptions and biases of home ownership, its financial implications, the lifestyle differences between both, as well as a foolproof framework for how you can confidently walk away knowing that you made the right choice. But first, this video is very fittingly brought to you by LG, and more specifically, their brand new CineBeam S projector. If you've ever lived in a rental before, you'll know how hard it is to make the space feel like home. You can't knock down walls, you can't wire in a cinema room, but what you can do is transform a plain white wall into a 100-inch screen from just several centimeters away. This is the beauty of LG's new CineBeam S. It's a compact, ultra-short throw projector, no bigger or heavier than a small stack of books, meaning that instead of an unsightly box as the centerpiece of your room, you can just push it up almost right against any blank wall in your home and you're ready for a big screen experience. And because it sits only several centimeters away from the wall, it works in even the smallest rooms, such as a studio apartment, at the foot of your bed, or even in a college dorm. You can still get a massive 100-inch screen without needing a giant home or the commitment of using it in a single dedicated space. But what's really impressive is, despite its humble size, this is a full-on 4K ultra-high definition RGB laser projector. So the picture is razor sharp and it covers an ultra-wide color gamut at 154% of DCI-P3. And so you're getting next to cinema level visuals and color accuracy regardless of where you choose to place it in your home. And even if your walls aren't white, LG thought of that too, with wall color adjustment. So the projector compensates so you still get natural colors, while autofocus and keystone correction ensures you immediately end up with a sharp, straight image, which makes setting up this projector almost effortless. When watching many projectors during the day or when with the lights on, it can make many of them seem almost unusable because of their low brightness. But with 500 ANSI lumens and a 450,000 to 1 contrast ratio, the LG CineBeam S is still impressively crisp in daylight or with the lights on. But it may surprise you that this projector isn't just about the visuals. Its built-in stereo speakers support Dolby Atmos, and streaming content is just as seamless, because with LG WebOS built in, you can stream straight from your favorite apps. Plus there's connectivity for HDMI, USB-C, Bluetooth, AirPlay 2, and ScreenShare, which covers nearly every device you could ever want to connect. All of this comes in a super compact, sleek, minimal package that doesn't take over your space, which, for someone who's as design and space conscious as myself, I think this may be one of the easiest ways I've found to elevate the functionality and flexibility of a space without permanent and costly changes. And so if you want the big screen experience without the big screen commitment, check out the LG CineBeam S using the link that I've left down in the description below. As someone now in my mid-30s, almost 5 years into being a parent, the pressure to finally buy a home has never been louder, and I know that I'm definitely not alone. On the one hand, through home ownership, you don't want to chain yourself to decades of debt, finding yourself stressed, overworked, and financially fragile. But on the other hand, you don't want to look back years from now and realize that you passed up on an amazing opportunity that could have completely changed you or your family's future. And so renting versus buying isn't the simple win-lose calculation that so many people make it out to be. It's complicated, it's messy, and it's deeply personal. And whichever decision you end up going with, the financial implications and risk of regret are real. And as some of you probably noticed from that sponsored segment, we're in the process of moving again. Not even 2 years since the last time. And after the points that I'm going to outline in this video, you'll be able to understand the ultimate choice that we made and why we made it. For decades now, buying a home has been sold to us as the ultimate milestone. You graduate, you get married, have kids, and you buy a home. And so home ownership becomes not just about shelter, but about identity. It's proof that you've made it, and for a long time it was a beautiful dream. Stability, community, a place that was truly yours to start a family and grow old in. Back when the American dream was in full swing, homes were priced roughly 3 times the average income. But what about today? In many cities it's 10, even 15 times as much, because wages flatlined, costs climbed, and yet the pressure still hasn't changed. The majority of society still expects you to buy, even if it means taking on a mortgage that eats half of your paycheck for the next 30 years. And this happened because this was a dream that was very real for our parents. But now, unfortunately, this cultural script is colliding with today's reality. And so knowing this, how can we even get a sense of what's actually affordable in relation to our income? One of the biggest yardsticks is the 28% rule, and this actually came from mortgage lenders in the mid-20th century, who decided that you shouldn't spend more than 28% of your gross income on housing, with many well-respected financial gurus still choosing to preach this age-old rule of thumb. But back then, homes cost about 3 or 4 times the average salary. That's the era when home ownership exploded, and it's how we ended up with the generation that we now know as baby boomers. But fast forward today, in cities like Vancouver, Toronto, London, and New York, homes cost 10 to 15 times the average income, which means that for most people and families, the 28% rule is a complete fantasy. It's almost ridiculous to be expected to follow it unless you're in the top 1%. Or somehow finding a way to buy way below market value, most likely in somewhere completely different. And so what use is all this information? Well, you're really only left with 3 choices. Ignore the rule and stretch yourself, move to somewhere less populated where that rule can still actually exist, or simply give up on buying entirely. But before you go and run away with that, get ready, because here's the not so simple nuance. Historically, home values always increase, so stretching yourself can actually be a smart move if you consider your home as a solid long-term investment. Now, many people run away thinking that this is the obvious right decision, but financially, your home is also one of the biggest investments you'll ever make, and that's where things get interesting, because investors have known for decades just how dangerous our emotions can be when money's involved. At the end of the day, a house, on the one hand, it's shelter, yes, but for many of us, it's also our pride and joy. And in the markets, when you allocate funds to an asset that you're emotionally tied to, this is called emotional investing. And it's what happens when fear, greed, or pride take over rational thinking. When people are caught in this frame of mind, they usually end up buying in a frenzy because they know that everyone else around them is too. They may know people who've made it this way in the past, and they convince themselves that the story that they like the most is the one that must be true. Which is a bit like a crypto bro who goes all in on Dogecoin simply because he likes Shiba Inus and Elon Musk so much. It may surprise you that housing in many ways is actually no different. FOMO drives people to stretch further than they can afford. Pride or external pressures, like those from boomer parents, may convince us that owning is always better, no matter what the numbers say. And then loss aversion keeps many families in homes that don't actually fit their lifestyles anymore, simply because they've already sunk so much time and money into them. And suddenly, before you know it, arguably the biggest financial decision of your life becomes less about investing and more about confusing your feelings with your finances. And so this is why understanding our emotions around housing is so crucial, because it's the people who see their emotions clearly who are the ones that make rational, confident decisions, whether that's buying, moving, or walking away entirely. And so the next question is, how do you actually make this decision with confidence, along with the numbers to back it up? This is where the 5% rule comes in, a surprisingly simple financial framework for comparing the financial implications of renting versus buying. It goes a little something like this. Take the price of the home that you want, or the home that you can afford a down payment on, and multiply it by 5%. That's your annual cost of ownership. Then divide that number by 12, and that's your break-even rent. And so what does using this rule in real life actually look like? Let's say a 2-bedroom condo in Vancouver costs $1 million. Yeah, that's real life numbers. 5% of $1 million, that's 50,000. Divide 50,000 by 12, and you get about 4,200 a month. That 4,200 is your magic number. If you can rent a similar place for less than $4,200 a month, renting is highly likely to make more sense. However, in the circumstance that rent costs more, when buying, you actually may end up ahead long term. And so at this point, you're probably wondering how this 5% rule works. Essentially, what it's doing is comparing the yearly rental cost of a rental property to the associated yearly costs of home ownership. And this magic 5% number isn't just plucked out of the sky, because it's broken down into 4 key areas: property taxes, maintenance, mortgage payments, and what's most overlooked, the opportunity cost should you have invested your down payment elsewhere. And at this point in the video, before I go on to explain this in detail, I have to credit Ben Felix and Humphrey Yang for breaking this down so well on their channels. So be sure to check them out if you want a more detailed look at the intricacies of this rule, which I'll leave links to down in the description below. Property taxes usually amount to roughly 1% of the home's value each year. Then there's money that goes into maintenance and service charges, or strata fees if you have them, which usually makes up another 1% a year, just for things like keeping the roof from leaking and keeping the furnace running. And finally, the big ones: your monthly mortgage payments and the opportunity cost, or cost of capital, from your initial down payment, which is around 3%. Which is calculated by comparing how this money or capital could have been earning better returns elsewhere, such as being invested in a low-cost index fund that tracks the entirety of the stock market, which historically returns between 5 and 7%, versus the 1 to 2% increase of the general property market, which actually makes this 3% number quite a conservative figure. But before I go on, because I can already see so many people typing out angry comments, as a side note, the return on property values obviously varies wildly from place to place, as we all have that one friend who made an absolute killing on their home from buying the right place at the right time. But it's important to be clear that this is just like the luck of picking individual stocks, like Apple, Tesla, or even Dogecoin, because nobody has a crystal ball into the future of individual property markets. Otherwise, we'd all be millionaires. And so it's much more rational to consider the stock and housing markets as a whole. But the key difference is that with the stock market, you can essentially limit your exposure by buying almost the whole thing through a low-cost index fund, which is generally far safer than buying an individual piece of real estate. And so this is why when you add those aforementioned percentages together, you get a pretty conservative 5% rule of thumb to go by in regards to estimating your home's annual costs. Although some may say that in reality, this rule of thumb may actually be closer to 9%. But if you're still with me, the reason that this rule works so well is because it forces you to look at the hidden opportunity cost of home ownership that so many people seem to overlook. And this rule is actually equally as important to consider if you already own your own home, as it bypasses any attached emotions that you may have and shows you only the numbers. And so if you haven't done this already, I'd highly recommend you quickly doing this calculation for yourself, where walking away can be just as smart if it frees up capital and flexibility for other investments, which are the opportunity cost, and then this can be allocated to places like the stock market or a new business venture, or even using it to take more of our time away from work to spend more of our short time on earth on our faith or our friends or our family. But here is where I want to flip the script. The 5% rule isn't perfect, because nothing ever is, but it does give us a very rational and I'd say conservative baseline to compare against, instead of just defaulting to our instinct and past programming that renting is simply throwing money down the drain. Because actually, when you consider amortization schedules, which are basically the graph of how your mortgage payments are structured, in reality, investing in the wrong house at the wrong time can also be throwing money down the drain too, in essentially renting money from the bank instead of renting property from a landlord. But the 5% rule's biggest strength is also its biggest weakness, because it discredits emotions entirely. Because it's a tool, tools can't measure what actually matters to you, what brings you joy or meaning or purpose. And because we humans are emotional beings, even if buying doesn't make perfect financial sense, the life that your home can give you can. And that's because no spreadsheet can capture what it feels like to raise your kids in a backyard of your own, or the pride of customizing a place without having to ask for permission, or the ability to create real income for yourself by buying a fixer-upper and spending your time refurbishing or remodeling it, which is actually something that's especially powerful as it's the value of your entire home that appreciates, not just your initial down payment. And sometimes if you just need something like a single family home, there sometimes aren't really that many of them up for rent, which can really leave you with very few options other than to take on rent and buy your own home. However, as tempting as this may seem, this way of thinking also cuts both ways. No formula can capture the freedom of renting either. The ability to move quickly for a new opportunity in a new city, or a better deal on a better property, or the financial padding to take a year off work and go traveling. And that's all while living a life that's free from the weight of debt and the anxiety of home repossession. So yes, while the 5% can help frame the financial side, it still leaves out the very human side, with variables such as school districts, aging grandparents, and cultural values. And that's why this decision isn't just about the numbers. And so I've come to the conclusion that it's about aligning this math with the kind of life that you actually want to live. Are you a type of person who enjoys fixing things yourself, tinkering on the weekends, and making a house truly yours? Or are you the sort of person who would rather call someone else to do those things when something breaks, and then spend that Saturday with your family or friends instead? Are you the sort of person that finds the idea of staying put for the next 10 or 20 years comforting? Or are you the kind of person who prefers flexibility of moving cities in case things change, or the ability to quickly reduce your expenses by downsizing to a smaller place in case a lifestyle change comes up? And the good news is that when you pair this self-reflection with the cost of home ownership, which we can quickly establish using the 5% rule, it's quite easy to gain a very confident and self-assured steer on which decision is the right one, not only for you, but for your family and those around you. We initially moved here from the UK because of my wife's career and her family, which has been absolutely incredible for both her and my daughter. But right now, Vancouver is in the middle of a condo crisis, where a surge of new supply has outpaced the demand, so house prices are dropping. And thanks to the timing with low interest rates, it makes it an absolutely fantastic time to buy, as all of the power is now in the buyer's hands. But because of this increased housing supply, so many owners can't sell for what they'd initially hoped for, so these condos are now flooding the rental markets too. And so for the first time in a while, with this increased supply on the rental market, rents have been coming down too. In this place that you're used to seeing right now, we managed to negotiate a massive 4% in rent reduction, which is huge. But this was mainly because we found a place nearby that's roughly 22% bigger while being a whole 8% cheaper than what we were originally paying. And so when our request to get this place's rent to match was ultimately denied, we knew it was time to move. And so that's how we've made this decision to continue renting, by applying the 5% rule to the equivalent condo prices that are nearby, where monthly costs of home ownership would be roughly between 14 and 42% higher to what we'll be paying in rent. But this decision wasn't just about the numbers and the school district. It had the bonus of being able to live in the same building as my brother-in-law and his wife again, much like we did when we initially first moved here to Vancouver. And so honestly, this is the whole goal with the message of this video. The right decision isn't always the most profitable one, as if this were the case, we'd be way better off living in somewhere like Dubai. Because really, the right decision is the one that's made with clear intentions, the one that fits your values, which are inextricably linked to both our money and our time. And so hopefully this framework has provided you just a little more clarity, regardless if you're already a homeowner or a renter. And as a takeaway, just be clear that there is no right answer. By making this video, am I saying that we'll never buy? Absolutely not, because if I'm ever in a financial position to accumulate a down payment that's big enough to purchase or build my forever home, for the sort of person that I am, I can't wholeheartedly say that I'd be making the most of my finances by simply letting them sit in other investments. But as I'm definitely miles away from the dream of one day being able to design and build my own home, I'd hugely appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and perhaps share this video with whoever you know that might need to hear it. And of course, as always, I'll see you in the next one.